On a cold March morning in the mountains of southwestern Virginia, a man backed a loaded dump truck to the edge of a creek that had not held a wild trout in 100 years, and he tipped 40 tons of angular limestone straight into the water. The rock hit the current with a sound like an avalanche, throwing up a brown wall of silt that rolled downstream for half a mile, and the men standing on the bank went quiet, because every fisheries expert who had looked at this plan had told him the same thing. The stones would bury the stream bed. The stones would choke whatever was left. The stones would finish off a creek that was already, by every official measure, biologically dead. He kept unloading anyway. By noon, there were 3 more truckloads in the water. 60 additional tons of stone wedged into the channel in a pattern that made no sense to anyone watching, and the creek that had been a straight, scoured, lifeless ditch since before the men's grandfathers were born, began, for the first time in a century, to do something it had forgotten how to do. It began to slow down. His name was a matter of public record, a retired United States Army veterinarian who had spent his working life keeping military dogs and horses alive, and who now, in his 60s, was standing knee-deep in a creek that the state of Virginia had effectively written off, doing the one thing the professionals swore would kill it faster. The water here was called Cedar Run on some maps, and nothing at all on others. A 2-mile trickle that fed into a larger river, and its story was the same story told about 10,000 Appalachian streams. 100 years earlier, the mountains above it had been clear-cut for timber and torn open for coal, and the rain that once soaked slowly into forest soil now sheeted off bare ground and blasted down the hillsides, and it took the creek with it. The channel that had wandered and pooled and riffled through hardwood shade was straightened into a gutter, scoured down to bedrock, stripped of every gravel bar and undercut bank a fish needs to survive. The old people in the valley remembered brook trout in it, remembered catching them by hand as children, and then one generation remembered being told there used to be trout, and then the memory itself thinned out until the creek was just water moving fast over stone on its way to somewhere else. When state biologists electrofished it in the 1990s, running a current through the water to stun and count whatever lived there, they brought up almost nothing. A few tolerant minnows. No trout. No insects worth logging. The report used a word that follows dead streams around for decades afterward. Impaired. And impaired, in the bureaucratic language of water, is a sentence that is almost never overturned. The standard fix, when there is money for a fix at all, is an engineering project. Surveys and permits and heavy machinery, concrete-grade control structures, engineered log jams bolted into the banks, a design stamped by a licensed professional, and a price tag that runs from several $100,000 into the millions for a stream of any length. Cedar Run was never going to get that money. It was too small, too remote, too far down a list that had thousands of larger, more visible waters ahead of it. In the official accounting, it was a stream that would stay dead because reviving it cost more than it was worth. The veterinarian did not accept that accounting, and the reason he did not accept it is the part of this story the experts never saw coming. Somewhere in his reading, in the long, quiet years after he left the army, he had come across the work of a man in Wyoming who had spent decades restoring desert trout streams with almost no money and almost no machinery, using nothing but hand-placed rock. The idea was heretical to trained engineers. Instead of building rigid structures to control the water, you gave the water back its own tools and let it rebuild itself. You placed loose stone in specific patterns, and the current did the rest. Over months and years, sorting sediment, digging pools, raising the bed, doing for free the work that a bulldozer does badly and expensively. It was slow. It looked, to a professional eye, like a man throwing rocks in a creek and hoping. And that is exactly what the fisheries experts thought they were looking at when they told him it would kill the fish. Except there were no fish left to kill, and he understood something they had stopped believing. A dead creek is not an empty creek. It is a creek waiting for the one thing it has been missing. The stones went in through the spring of that year, load after load, and the pattern that had looked random began to reveal itself. He was not filling the channel. He was building a series of low structures, shaped like a downward-pointing arc, the point aimed upstream, each one spanning the creek and dipping in the middle so that the entire flow was gathered and funneled toward the center. Water is lazy and relentless at the same time. Pointed at the center of the channel, it stopped chewing at the banks and started digging straight down, and behind each arc of stone, a pool began to form, deeper by the week. And below each pool the current spread and slowed, and finally began to drop the sand and gravel it had been carrying uselessly downstream for a century. By that first summer there were gravel bars in Cedar Run for the first time in living memory. Small ones, ugly ones, but gravel, the exact clean loose stone that a spawning trout requires and that the scoured channel had never been able to hold. The men who had gone quiet on the bank in March came back in July and stood looking at pools of clear, cool water where there had been a shallow race, and one of them reached down and turned over a stone at the edge of a riffle, and clinging to the underside of it was a mayfly larva. It does not sound like much, a single insect on the bottom of a rock, but to anyone who reads water, it was the most important thing that had happened in that valley in 100 years. Mayflies are the canaries of a cold stream. They cannot live in silt, cannot live in warm, stagnant water, cannot live where there is no oxygen and no clean stone to grip. They are the base of the whole pyramid, the food that everything above them depends on, and they had come back on their own, drifting down from some cleaner tributary, or hatching from eggs that had waited in the gravel, the moment the creek gave them a place to hold on. And if you have followed this far, you already know the deeper reason the experts got it wrong. But stay with it, because the number the state biologists recorded 3 years later is the part almost no one believes when they first hear it, and I will give it to you before the end. What the veterinarian understood, and what the standard model of stream engineering had quietly forgotten, is that Appalachian creeks were never meant to run fast and straight and clean swept. Their whole ecology is built on obstruction. A healthy mountain stream is a mess of fallen logs and boulder jams and beaver ponds and gravel bars, and every one of those obstructions creates the slow, deep, cold, shaded pockets where life concentrates. Take the obstructions away, as a century of logging and channelizing did, and you do not get a cleaner stream. You get a sterile one. The rock structures were not fighting the creek. They were reminding it what it used to be. Through the second year he kept working, and the work was almost entirely his own hands and the hands of a few neighbors he had talked into it, hauling stone in wheelbarrows and setting each one by feel, reading the current, adjusting an arc a few inches at a time when the water told him it was wrong. He built more than one type of structure. In the straight fast runs, he set the arcs that dug pools. On the outside of the bends, where the current wanted to tear the bank apart, he laid sloped aprons of stone that turned the flow back toward the middle and let willow and alder take root in the protected soil behind them. The banks that had been raw and collapsing began to green over and knit together, and the roots did what roots do, holding the soil, shading the water, dropping leaves and insects into the current, feeding the creek from the edges. The water temperature in the new pools began to fall, a few degrees, but for a cold water fish, a few degrees is the difference between possible and impossible, between a stream a trout can breathe in and one where it suffocates in the warm shallows of late summer. If any of this is landing with you, do me one small favor and subscribe, because stories like this one are the whole reason this channel exists, and I want to keep telling them. Now here is where the creek did something the veterinarian had hoped for but could not promise. He had never stocked it. He had not driven up with a tank truck of hatchery trout and poured them in, the way most restoration is measured, because he wanted to know whether the water itself was truly alive again, and the only honest test of that is whether wild fish come back on their own. In the third spring after the first stones went in, a biologist from a regional conservation group waded up Cedar Run with an electrofishing pack on his back, the same technology that had brought up almost nothing 2 decades earlier, and he ran the current through the first deep pool below the highest set of stone arcs. For a moment, nothing. Then, rolling up stunned from the bottom of a pool that had not existed 3 years before, came a brook trout, wild, native, the exact fish the old people in the valley had described catching by hand as children, the fish that every official document said had been gone from that water for a century. It had not been stocked. It had come up on its own from somewhere downstream, found cold, clean water and clean gravel and mayflies to eat, and it had moved in. And it was not alone. By the end of that survey, the biologist had counted brook trout of 3 different sizes, which meant something even bigger than presents. Different sizes mean different ages. Different ages mean the fish were not just surviving in the creek, they were breeding in it. The gravel bars the stones had built were being used, right then, as spawning beds. The mechanism that the experts had been certain would bury the fish had instead built the exact nursery the fish needed to make more of themselves. The creek was not being kept alive by a man anymore. It was alive. Word of it began to move, the way these things do. First among the local fishermen, and then among the biologists who had written the place off. Some of them came to look, and a few of them came prepared to be unimpressed, because a retired veterinarian throwing rocks in a creek is not how the profession likes to see its work done. What they found was harder to dismiss than they expected. The pools were measurably deeper. The temperature data, logged by cheap sensors the veterinarian had sunk in the water, showed a stream running consistently colder than it had any right to. The insect counts had gone from almost nothing to dozens of species, and the trout kept turning up, year after year, in numbers that climbed instead of crashing. The method that had no engineering stamp and had cost a rounding error compared to a permitted restoration was outperforming projects that had cost 1,000 times as much. That comparison is the uncomfortable core of the whole story, and it is why some professionals resisted it so hard. A conventional engineered restoration of a stream this size can run past $1 million, and it produces a channel designed to hold its shape against the water. The veterinarian's approach produced a channel designed to work with the water, and it cost him, by his own accounting, the price of the stone and the fuel to haul it, a few $1,000s stretched across several years. It also cost him something that does not show up on any budget, which is time and the patience to let a creek heal at a creek's own speed, rather than a contractor's. But the results in that valley did not care which method was more respectable. The fish only cared whether the water was cold and clean and full of gravel and insects, and the rocks had made it so. There was a hard stretch in the middle of it all that nearly undid everything, and it came not from the water, but from the paper. Because he had moved earth and stone in a stream, questions arose about permits, about whether a private citizen restoring a creek by hand had the standing and the paperwork to do what state agencies do with teams of engineers. For a while it looked as though the very success of the project might make it a target, that the thing everyone could see working might be halted because it had not been done the approved way. It is one of the quiet cruelties of this kind of work that the rules built to stop people from harming streams can also stop the rare person trying to heal one. But the evidence in the water was too plain to argue with, and the fish counts too well documented, and in the end, the creek's own recovery became the argument that protected it. The work was allowed to stand, and it became, instead of a violation, a demonstration. Other landowners up and down those mountains began asking him to look at their own dead streams, and he went, and he taught them the patterns, the upstream pointing arc, the sloped apron on the bend, the discipline of setting one stone and waiting to see what the water did before setting the next. What he was really teaching was a way of seeing. Stop treating the creek as a problem to be controlled, and start treating it as a partner that only needs its tools returned. The brook trout in Cedar Run are, in the strict sense, a small thing. They are not a rare subspecies. They will not make headlines beyond the region, but they are proof of a proposition that reaches far past 1 2-mile creek in Virginia, which is that the machinery of nature is not gone in these damaged places. It is dormant. It is waiting behind 100 years of neglect for someone to give it back the one condition it cannot supply for itself, and then it does, quickly and for free. The work we have convinced ourselves requires millions of dollars and heavy equipment. The mayflies did not need to be installed. The trout did not need to be delivered. They needed a pool, a gravel bar, a few degrees of cold, and they came home on their own. Now the number I promised you. 10 years after the first 40 tons of stone went into the water that everyone said it would kill, the conservation group ran a full census of Cedar Run, and in a creek that had been officially, measurably dead for a century, that had held 0 trout in the surveys of the 1990s. They counted more than 1,100 wild brook trout per mile, a density that placed it among the healthiest native trout streams in that entire part of the state, higher than waters that had never been damaged at all. All of it descended from fish that walked in on their own, the moment a retired veterinarian with a truckload of rock gave a dead creek back its shape. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to go and watch my most recent video, because I think you'll find something in it worth your time. And thank you, truly, for spending part of your day here with me.